Hello, everyone. We've just had a few challenges trying to get all two presenters as well as Beren on at the same time. Unfortunately, we're unable to do so. So Beren is now just an attendee. It looks like we've got Joanna as host. Are you there, Joanna? Okay. So in the absence of anybody else, I think we're ready to get started. Excellent. So I'm Matt, and alongside David, my business partner, we'll be taking a look at neurodiversity. This is a tech-based angle, but the ideas and thoughts should be relatively transferable. So David is going to start by taking you through a little bit of his journey. He'll give you a bit of a retrospective overview of his life and journey, and he'll also give you a perspective on neurodiversity as an actually autistic person. And then I'll pick up and we'll take you through the importance of considering neurodiversity when we're looking to build accessible, inclusive, and diverse products. Finishing with a few specific examples of how the power of neurodiversity can add huge value to organizations, teams, and products. So on that note, I'll pass you over to David.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I'm David, and I'm autistic. This is me, around about 5 years old, sat on my father's workbench in the UK. He was a Navy aircraft electronics technician, and I was a fan of pork pies, some well-known English delicacy. Some 20 years later, after spending some time trying to settle on a career, which is another story in itself, I found myself at Royal Air Force Lucas in Scotland, and I was the officer in charge of ground communications and air navigation aids. So before the fall of the Berlin Wall, Lucas played a major part in the UK's airspace defence against the Soviet Union at that time. It was the only UK airfield in the north to maintain a permanent quick reaction alert, or QRA. And this was to launch a couple of fighter jets on minute standby, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. So we were always on alert. So I held an important and responsible job. I was 26 years old, leading a team of 50 technicians. My responsibilities were to keep all the ground electronics working 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. That included the Plessey AR1 approach radar. This was the eyes of our local controllers. So what has this got to do with neurodiversity or autism? If you asked me then, I wouldn't have known at all. I'd only found out I'm autistic a year and a half ago, and that's well over 30 years later. So let me continue. Okay. This is the system diagram of the radar. The top section is the radar scanner and the cabin below it. The bottom section sits within the air traffic control tower to the right, or to the left even. This is fine when the cabin and tower are close together, as in the picture. However, at Aria Flukas, the distance between the radar head and the control tower was about 1.5 kilometers. Everything to keep that system operational passed through a single 100 plus pair cable buried in the ground. It wasn't nicely color coded like the one in the picture in the center. Every single pair was dirty white with very few distinguishing marks, a bit like the smaller cable also shown. On one Saturday morning, about 11 o'clock, I was just leaving for a shopping trip with my wife, and the phone rang. "Sir," said one of my team, "I think you'd better come in. The radar has stopped turning." I drove immediately out to my office by the control tower, and the duty technicians were waiting, the Land Rover engine running. "There's been an incident, sir," I was told. We drove out toward an open spot in the middle of the airfield, and I was told that labourers digging a trench for some communications cabling had put a spade through the cable connecting the radar to the tower. The radar had stopped, and air traffic control and flight operations were not happy people. When we arrived on scene, the scene was not dissimilar to this. Two men with thick Irish accents looking a lot like the dishevelled workers in the picture here, sat in the trench. Each held an end of the cable, and I was told they'd come across what looked like an old-fashioned waxed paper wrapped cable, about 5 or 6 centimetres in diameter. They assumed it was old and disused, so proceeded to dig through it with a pickaxe and a spade. I looked across to where the radar stood motionless, looked back to the tower, picturing the panic and anxiety setting in amongst the duty controllers, and I looked back to my technicians, who returned my look expectantly. It was up to me. I looked at the labourers sat in the trench holding the cable, and as I registered their hands working as we talked, they were each pairing off individual wires, sorting through the ragged, dirty ends. These were labourers, but my instincts, my senses were translating data as information. I instinctively processed the scene before me. I said to the 2 labourers, more a statement than a question, "You know what you're doing." And they nodded. I said, "Do it." My technicians looked at me and they were a bit perplexed. I said, "Let's go back to the office." In less than 2 hours, our radar was hot and turning once again. The full capability of the airfield was restored, repaired by 2 labourers many would not have given a second thought to. Had I followed the protocol for such an event, I would have declared a major outage on the airfield. I would have called in our regional repair team from the south of England, knowing the repair was beyond our capability. We would have been offline, non-operational for 2 days at least. If an anecdote is a story with a point, what's the point I'm trying to make here? So little known to me at the time, my autistic brain had been working on another level, focused on the problem without social bias, prejudice, or preconceptions. I was able to see the solution before me. I was able to shut out the potential distraction of the many voices of concern around me, my technicians, the potential senior officers, air traffic controllers, and pilots. They would not have seen it. I was able to look beyond the appearance of what was in front of me to understand what it was that I was actually seeing, not what I thought I saw. I was able to see the solution to the problem way before anybody else. Not many years after the radar incident, I found myself as one of the Royal Air Force's leading IT and software engineers. After the airfield at Lucas, I'd spent 2 years learning Unix, Fortran, and a whole bunch of other systems and computing stuff. I'd set up a team of over 20 Air Force technicians supporting software for Skynet 4, which is the UK's military satellite communication system and part of NATO's communications. And I was the first person to do that. There was no instruction book. It turns out my autistic brain is pretty good at working stuff out from common sense and logic. About 1991, I was the MOD's software, that's the Ministry of Defence's software specialist, witnessing a subcontractor testing for the handover of new spacecraft telemetry control software for our satellites. British Aerospace was the prime contractor, and we were about a week into 2 weeks of full-on test schedules. In a progress meeting, I asked the subcontractor, "What time early this morning did you recompile the code? I can't find details in the test log." The British Aerospace manager immediately stopped the meeting and I was asked to leave the room. I stood outside in the corridor like a naughty child at school. There were a lot of raised voices in the room at that point. Then the door opened and the British Aerospace manager came out. "David, we have a problem," he said. "We don't know what to do." The subcontractor did an unauthorized rebuild of the main system about 2 a.m. this morning. "I know," I said. Again, I didn't know about my autism then, but now I know that my innate ability to spot patterns in seemingly unrelated facts is one of my autistic strengths, just like spotting the patterns before me in the muddy cable trench of a military airfield. "It's fine," I told British Aerospace. They thought they could sweep it under the carpet. They know they can't. They won't do that again. I said, "I'm happy to continue." British Aerospace thanked me. As my expertise pushed me up the ladder of sort of technical competence within the Air Force, I was let down by my relatively poor social performance amongst my peers, my fellow officers. I found it hard to mix socially. I could do it to a point, but it wasn't easy or it wasn't natural. It was hard work pretending to be someone I thought I should be. I had proven ability to solve problems. However, 4 high recommendations for promotion on technical merit were overturned by senior officers who didn't like aspects of my character. I just didn't fit in. I now understand my difficulties are related to the social weaknesses that go along with my autistic strengths. Around the late 1990s, when leaving the Air Force, I seemed okay at getting shortlisted for some really interesting interviews, like the role of project manager at CERN for the building of the then new particle accelerator, the Large Hadron Collider. I was on a shortlist of 3 for that job. My CV has always had some interesting stuff on it. However, my last ever full year of full-time paid employment occurred in 1999. That was over 20 years ago. I have interviewed with consultancies like Deloitte's and Grant Thornton's and others in the UK, only to be told I had no relevant commercial experience. I now read that as a code for I wasn't seen to be a good cultural fit with their teams. While I haven't technically passed a job interview since 1980, I have been a managing director and a chief executive officer and have employed other people. I've also gained a PhD when I was told the subject I wanted to study, the art of management, was probably not possible. My PhD did what I set out to do and won 2 international awards for excellence and was published as a monograph by Palgrave Macmillan. I solve problems. I overcome difficulties. It's what I do. I don't let things like not having a job or upsetting some people get in the way of what I set out to do. If there are no problems, we might all sit back and relax. We might view our lives from our perspective. We might have the luxury of joining with like minds in culturally cohesive, well-contrived teams. We might set out to achieve a utopian ideal, what we know we can do, as long as we don't face problems, as long as all goes to plan. I've sat in the recruitment chair myself as an employer and a headhunter. I think the situation where we select people on some notion of cultural fit rather than from any proven ability to solve problems is itself problematic. The world around us seems to be throwing more problems than ever at us on an increasing basis. I believe the current recruitment protocols merely self-select mediocrity. And I don't mean this in a pejorative sense. Rather, mediocre is the ordinary, the commonplace and norm of existence. When we empirically identify types and characteristics, we measure countless examples of that type. We draw up statistical distributions and determine the median, the norm, the average for that type. And we do this so that when we look for it in the future, we can find it. I suggest that this is sort of representational of the neurotypical population, the mean, the average. Anything that doesn't resemble that mean exists in the realm of 2 or 3 standard deviations either side of it. Those things are different. And I suggest this is representative of the neurodivergent, all different from the norm. So IQ tests, EQ tests, Belbin team scores, psychometric testing, and many other instruments rely on evidence-based statistical means. This is what I mean by self-selecting mediocrity, designing our ideal culturally coherent teams. If we look for and select some particular thing on the basis of a mean, we will get what we look for. We will not see the unusual, the different, or the richness of variety that sits outside even one standard deviation from that mean. Collectively, we share a problem, and it may be a sweeping generalization, but in the UK, for example, the Open University's 2018 Business Barometer showed that organisations spent over £6 billion on temporary workers, recruitment fees, inflated salaries and extra training, all as a result of a lack of the actual skills required for today's problematic, volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous world. This is the VUCA world we hear people talk of. Having now been diagnosed as autistic, I believe most people don't consider looking beyond the plus or minus 1 standard deviation from their ideal. They miss the richness that lies beyond. Ultimately, this is what Matthew and I are looking to do with Diversitas, to create a platform that will help shape things up a bit. helping people to have honest conversations about widening opportunity to a whole host of thinking from odd angles, including employment opportunity for the neurodiverse of all sorts in freelancing, employment, and enterprise in general. So thank you, Matt. I'll hand over to you at this point.
Just getting my clicking hand ready. Okay, so my journey in neurodiversity is slightly different from David's. My journey was inspired by my autistic son, Thomas, as you can see in the picture. And Thomas was diagnosed as autistic age 4. So we were fortunate, we got a lot of advice early on, and we were able to pivot his learning and focus on what works best for him. So I'll start by having a quick look at accessibility. My background is software, specifically software testing. And as we know, technology is everywhere. My son uses technology. We all use technology. You'd struggle to live in this world without being able to use technology. A lot of companies rely on a wide, diverse, satisfied customer base and is critical to their bottom line. But more important than that, accessibility drives inclusive and diverse products. And those products benefit a wide range of people in their daily lives. When we talk about accessibility, it's not just about disabilities. We're talking about diversity. My definition of accessibility has always been opening doors that shouldn't be closed and removing barriers that shouldn't exist. So when we start in the context of neurodiversity, we need to find that start point. I always say that the web content accessibility guidelines are always a good starting point. Don't discount them, but they are not the complete picture, especially when we're looking at neurodiversity. So my starting point tends to be emotional accessibility. Someone's emotional response to a product, that might be when they first go onto the product, what their initial reaction is. Is it too busy? Is there anything overstimulating when they first load that up? We all have an emotional response, whether we're conscious of it or not. So when we're using software, how does it make us feel? There might be triggers in there that make us feel uncomfortable or frustrated. A lot of that might be usability. So is it intuitive? Do we need to break open a user guide just to be able to work our way through the product? And expectations. We always go into using products with a set of expectations. Again, whether we know it or not, we have a predetermined expectations based on experience. Things like, is the navigation familiar? Is it something we've used before? Are there pop-ups that are thrown while we're in the middle of doing something? Is performance what we would expect? So when we're talking about inclusive products, I'm gonna start by looking at a few things that it's worth avoiding, or if you can't avoid them, maybe consider how we can do them better. So unexpected delays, I touched on the previous slide. We should try and avoid these or limit these as much as possible. However, if we can't limit them, then we should look at maybe how we can continue communication during those delays, how we make sure people know what is happening. For Thomas, as an example, an unexpected delay can be a stimulant that can result in ultimately anger, frustration, and panics. If he gets into a state of panic, then we're talking about a product that is potentially unusable for him. Is there any time sensitivity? Do we need time sensitivity in there? That might be around completing purchases. It might be around offers or logging in. Do they need to be time sensitive? Can they be longer time periods? Is the consistency on the site? Consistency is a big usability factor. That's things like navigation, color schemes. Are we using the same navigation experience throughout the site? Is the color scheme consistent throughout the site, or do we feel like it's potentially on a different page altogether, a different site altogether, partway through that experience? Context. So we should avoid assuming context for people who'll be using this. Many autistic people have something called context blindness. They struggle with understanding specific contexts. An example for my son, an early example, was we used the phrase "good to go" a few times when we were going out. Are you good to go? Now, he associated good to go or go with going home at the end of the day. So when we talked about good to go, he often responded with, but I don't know, I don't want to go, I haven't finished yet. Jargon and excessively complex language can be really frustrating when you're using a site. It's always important that we keep text clear and unambiguous. And I've always said, be functional and clear, not fancy. Okay, we've talked about what a few things that might be best avoided, but what about some things that might improve? We can ensure we do to improve the inclusiveness of products. Neurodiverse people, ultimately, like all of us, are individuals. So you can't look at one neurodiverse person and say they'll be have the same experience as another neurodiverse person. So we need to think about diversity and provide options. Providing personalization on products, like things like turning advert pop-ups, video content on or off, is important. A lot of people talk about the power of visuals for neurodiverse people. And again, visuals can be a really powerful aid, but it's not an absolute. Some people still prefer written content, so use both. Give them options. Don't rely on catching accessibility issues in testing. And this is one that I'm sure Beren will attest to in testing in general. Build things in from the start. Consider how inclusive products and ideas and designs are before we start building. Finally, when we're looking at inclusivity, we have to include people in that. People are going to be using these products, so we need to include them in the journey. So, if we want to include people, how can we do that? I mean, how do you know that you're building an inclusive environment, and where do you look at to do that? Especially when we're talking about neurodiversity. So there are some external companies that are a good option for some people. Consultancy and services, places like Auticon, exceptional testing in Australia, Specialistin, who are across the world. It's likely within your companies that there are already existing neurodiverse people. That may be people who are known to the company and have disclosed that they're neurodiverse. It may be people who either haven't disclosed that they're neurodiverse or don't even know themselves that they're neurodiverse. As David said, he didn't realize until a lot later in life that he was autistic. But ultimately, if you're struggling to identify neurodiverse people, because we can't just go and ask people, are you autistic, are you neurodiverse? Ultimately, getting people involved and creating variance in different perspective is going to increase diversity. And there's a good chance that in those people, you'll be including neurodiverse people. Look at hiring. So if we want to get people through the door, we need to make sure that diversity is built into the way we hire. I'll go into more detail in a moment, but ultimately we need to consider if we've got any biases that we may be unaware of, biases that may discourage neurodiverse individuals to either apply or force them to struggle, put them in a position where they struggle. And hiring is only one part of the story. For neurodiverse people to thrive, organizations have to be accessible. We need to build teams to achieve success and avoid disengagement. We need neurodiverse individuals within teams to be able to achieve our full potential. Great. So how do we actually how do we make sure we've got inclusive teams? We want to build inclusive teams. What does that look like? So some of the key factors that I've talked about, and this isn't an all-inclusive list by any stretch of the imagination, it's just a few examples. So meetings can be really, really powerful, and you can get a lot of value out of meetings. But look at those meetings. Do they encourage input from everybody? Do they encourage engagement from everybody? Do they provide opportunity for everybody to input? And also, do we empower people who want to avoid engaging within meetings to find a different way of inputting? Are they well spaced? If overcrowded meetings can make people uncomfortable, and if people are uncomfortable, they're less likely to engage. Do they get broken into manageable time chunks? And are we using meeting rooms that are located in areas that are away from visual and audible distractions? Communication is a massively important factor in any team, but we need to make sure that communication is flexible. There's a lot of people who talk about best practice in communication, but it's taking that concept of good practice in different contexts rather than best practice applied everywhere. Remember, it's the message that's important, not how we deliver it. Some autistic people I've spoken to struggle with the concept of stand-ups, for example. So can we support them? Can we find different ways to help them engage in a stand-up? Maybe pairing them with somebody who can give an update for them so they're not put on the spot. And avoiding, when we're communicating, avoiding things like hints and implied messages, maybe avoiding things like sarcasm. At the end of the day, mislead and miscommunication or misunderstood communication is going to lead to cross lines. We need to look at the environment. Is the environment suitable? Open plan offices have a lot of value, but can also create overwhelming experiences for some people. Can we create safe spaces away from the hustle and bustle of the day-to-day office? Hot desks are quite popular, especially while people are working from home some days and going in others. But some people really struggle with that idea, and they prefer something comfortable and familiar routine of going into the office in the same location every day. Keeping working spaces away from communal areas, things like kitchens and other distractions that might stimulate through noise or smell. Looking at personal development, and I know Beren asked a question in relation to this. So it's about understanding individuals. And if you've got neurodiverse individuals in your team, understanding how they think and how they work. What are their areas of excellence and what are their limitations? Try not to push people down the route of trying to improve every area that they struggle with. It may not be possible. Do they have interests in growth, or do they see growth in the same way that everybody else does? Growth can be a deep dive in a specific area and being the go-to person who knows everything about one particular thing. But for others who find focusing on a single area more challenging, sometimes it can be better for them to have a variety in their development plan. But we need to think about individuals and work with individuals. Finally, acceptance and inclusion. So sell the fact that you are trying to drive acceptance and inclusion. Get people in, get coaching. There's a lot of coaching groups out there who can give coaching around neurodiverse friendly environments. Tell people that you're creating these environments. Talk to people in teams. Talk to them about their awareness of who may be in their team. Some people can make minor adjustments and make a whole difference to somebody else's working life. Think about buddying. So some of the challenge around going into a new company can be in finding ways of engaging with people. So how do we start getting people, how do we put somebody with the right person, the appropriate person to help them to engage better? But ultimately, if we want to we can have inclusive environments, but we've got to get people through the door. We need hiring to be inclusive. So we need to look at job adverts. That's our first line of attack when we're trying to bring somebody in. Do we focus on necessary skills? Don't pad adverts out with unnecessary skills. Don't go down the journey of adding everything you can think of when it's not relevant to the job. Things like good communication skills is subjective. Somebody who thinks that they've got average communication skills might not apply. Instead of good team player, maybe try willing to work with colleagues. Interviews, avoid panels, things. Try and focus on a small number of people, maybe one-to-one where possible. Is there an option to allow supporters to come in with interviewees? One example I've seen that's been really powerful is where we have to have an interview situation, is providing the first 4 to 5 questions in advance and allowing somebody to prepare on those. In a job, generally you'll have the opportunity to prepare, and you can go and access information. So why not provide that opportunity within an interview? Make sure that the process is clear and defined, and include things like support and directions to get there. Maps, pictures of landmarks, entrances, and things like that can be really powerful and put somebody at ease before they've even got there. And look at alternatives. Is it important that they're able to interview to be able to do the job? Interview is a very specific skill, and is really good for some people, and other people really struggle with it. Can we use skills-based tests to prove that somebody can do the job without having to put them on the spot? Things like job trials and placements, can they prove it without, can they go and do the job and show that they can do the job? Taking the pressure away, and then maybe an informal coffee to take that pressure away in a chat, you might get better engagement in an interview. And disclosure. So whenever we're talking about disclosure, this is one of the biggest factors for when people are going for jobs. Of the people that I've spoken to, and I've done a number of meetups, over 60% of around 200 people that I've spoken to said that they don't disclose because they're worried it'll affect their chances. So can we sell that the company is neurodiverse friendly? Can we put them at ease where they feel comfortable having that conversation? And can we expand that search to look at to go out and look for neurodiverse groups, so that we're ultimately expanding our network that we're trying to get people applying from? There are a lot of groups out there that have a number of neurodiverse people. So engaging the neurodiverse community directly shows that you've got confidence that you are an equal opportunity employer. Right, so we've talked about accessibility, but what we really want to end on here is the value of neurodiversity to companies. It's not a superpower, but it can be a superpower. Neurodiversity is ultimately not neurological diversity, and there's a reason that diversity forms part of that neurodiversity word. I can't give you a blow-by-blow account of everything that you will get from a neurodiverse person in a team, but I can give you a few examples. So there's been a lot of studies. Hardworking traits drive up productivity. So ASD employees have generally found, and this is across several pilot studies, companies have generally found across a number of pilot studies that ASD employees outperformed neurotypical employees for hard work and productivity. Also, pattern recognition and memory generally aid learning and analysis, and this is quite common in neurodiverse people. So JP Morgan's Autism at Work program, a guy named Anthony Pasilio talked about an individual that was that they were interviewing. This guy had no Java programming experience. They interviewed him on the Friday. He didn't know Java, but he said he'd learn it by the Monday. And sure enough, he came back after a few books and YouTube and tutorials, and by Monday he was proficient enough to get the job. Rational decision making and different ways of thinking tend to result in less cognitive bias and can drive innovation. And SAP have talked about this in a few research programs that are out there. So SAP's Autism at Work program, they talked about how people who see things differently have made a massive impact. And people who don't easily fit seamlessly tend to change the direction that the company looks in. And as a big company, it means that not everybody is looking in the same direction. Finally, as a society, it's really valuable to us. So David touched on this already, but reducing the cost of on or underemployment in that neurodiverse group is going to save us money. An example study found that lifetime economic cost of the support of under or unemployment for neurodiverse people is around 1.4 to 2.4 million people per person. That is an awfully big cost to society. That if we can work on driving inclusivity and diversity in the way we hire and the way we retain staff, will save us a lot of money in the long run. There are a lot of other figures out there that you'll be able to find. And on that note, we come to the end of the slides. So myself and David are passionate about this for very important personal reasons. So much so that we came together and we started Diversitas. Our aims are quite simple: promoting the value of neurodiversity, improving opportunities for neurodiverse community, and helping greater diversity and inclusion across the whole community. I'd advise you to keep your eyes open, because Diversitas, we're hoping to go live very, very soon. We've got some beta testing, so if anybody's interested in getting involved to help us early on with that, and just having a look at the site for us and giving us some feedback, taking some of those things, we want to lead from the front. So taking some of those examples I talked about around accessibility, the more people we can get looking at that, those early examples of the platform, the better we will come out at the end, and the more diverse the product's going to be. You can follow us on LinkedIn and Facebook, and if you want any more information, drop us a line. The email's there. Thank you.